The sterile, white envelope, edged with the polished crest of Oakhaven Estates, felt like a death warrant in Elias Thorne's trembling hand. Across the rickety porch, sterling blackwood, slick suit shimmering in the morning sun, offered a condescending smirk. "Mr. Thorne, this is your final notice. Your defiance ends today." Elias's gaze, aged but sharp, flickered from the paper to the sprawling McMansions blotting out his sky. His heart pounded. Then a strange glint sparked deep within his eyes, reflecting not defeat, but a flicker of something ancient, forgotten. The twist, a century in the making, was about to resurface, and the rising tide it promised would sweep away far more than just his ramshackle home. The morning sun, usually a welcome guest, felt like an interrogation lamp as it mercilessly highlighted every crack in Elias Thorne's porch planks, every peeling flake of paint on his 100-year-old farmhouse. It illuminated, too, the smug satisfaction on Sterling Blackwood's face, a man whose tailored suit and perfectly coiffed hair seemed designed to mock the very concept of imperfection. Blackwood, a prominent figure on the Oakhaven Estates Homeowners Association board, held an air of immutable authority, as if the entire development, with its perfectly manicured lawns and identical faux stone facades, was an extension of his own meticulously organized ego. "Mr. Thorne, this is getting tiresome," Blackwood stated, his voice a low, gravelly hum that carried an undertone of practiced annoyance. He held out a crisp, white envelope, its seal emblazoned with the Oakhaven crest, a stylized oak tree that, ironically, had been clear-cut to make way for the first wave of McMansions. "Your property is in flagrant violation of no less than a dozen covenants. The overgrown flora, the unapproved outbuildings, the aesthetic incongruity. It's a blight on the entire community. Our property values, Mr. Thorne, are at stake." Elias, a man whose skin was weathered like old leather and whose eyes held the deep-set wisdom of forgotten stories, took the envelope. His fingers, gnarled from a lifetime of working his small patch of land, fumbled slightly. He didn't need to open it. He knew its contents by heart. Eviction. Forcible sale. The culmination of 2 years of escalating harassment, fines, and increasingly aggressive legal threat. His home, a testament to 3 generations of Thornes, was a lone, defiant island in a sea of manufactured grandeur. "My flora is what's left of the original forest, Mr. Blackwood," Elias retorted, his voice raspy, a direct contrast to Blackwood's smooth baritone. "And my outbuildings were here before your community," was a twinkle in a developer's greedy eye. He clutched the envelope, a tremor running through his hand that he fought to suppress. This wasn't just a house. It was the last tangible link to his past, to his parents, to the grandfather who'd taught him to fish in the creek that now ran through Blackwood's meticulously landscaped backyard. Blackwood merely chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "Nostalgia doesn't pay the bills, Mr. Thorne, nor does it override legally binding covenant. The board has exhausted its patience. This notice initiates the final proceedings. You have 30 days to vacate the premises, or we will take legal action to remove you and seize the property." His eyes swept over the faded paint, the slightly askew porch swing, the riot of native plants that defied the HOA's rigid landscaping code. It was a look of utter disdain, as if Elias himself were as much a weed as the wild elderberry bush clinging to his fence line. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, but beneath it, a stubborn fire began to rekindle. He remembered his grandfather, a man of few words but immense resolve, pointing to the original deed, yellowed and brittle, kept in a lacquered box. "This paper," his grandfather had said, his voice quiet but firm, "is more than just ownership. It's history. It's power, if you know how to read it." Elias had dismissed it then, a child impatient for fishing, but the words echoed now, a faint, tantalizing whisper against the roaring storm of Blackwood's threats. "You think this is over?" Elias asked, his voice low, his gaze fixed on Blackwood. He wasn't a fighter by nature, more a keeper of the peace, a steward of the land. But they had pushed him. They had desecrated the land, built their monstrosities on foundations of forgotten history, and now they sought to erase him entirely. Blackwood's smirk widened. It's been over for a long time, Mr. Thorne. You just refuse to acknowledge it. Oakhaven Estates will finally be unified. He turned, his expensive loafers crunching on the gravel path Elias had refused to pave over, and strode towards his gleaming black SUV. As he opened the door, he paused, looking back. Oh, and one more thing, Mr. Thorne. The annual general meeting is next week. Perhaps you'd like to make AF. The sun rose the next morning, not as an interrogation lamp, but as a spotlight. Elias Thorne stood on his porch, a mug of black coffee steaming in his hands, and looked out at the Oakhaven Estates. He saw them for the first time not as an encroaching threat, but as an assembly of meticulously planned targets. The perfectly aligned driveways, the identical twin windows, the 3-car garages, all of it built on a foundation of professional hubris and legal negligence. They had built their world on dry land, but his deed, a fragile parchment from a forgotten century, was a key to a deluge. The despair that had clung to him for years was gone, replaced by a cold, surgical clarity. He was no longer fighting for his home. He was fighting for his history, and in doing so, he was about to weaponize it. He spent the morning in his study, the lacquered box of deeds and maps open on the desk. He cross-referenced the 1888 survey map with a modern topographical rendering of the area he'd found online, overlaying the lines, confirming his terrifying realization. A significant swath of Oakhaven Estates, including the land directly beneath Sterling Blackwood's sprawling monument to success, lay within the historical flood zone defined by the ancient water rights clause. The developer had filled in the wetlands and rerouted the creek, believing modern zoning laws and a handful of local permits trumped the ancient legal text. They had been wrong. Elias had one option, one path forward. He needed a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but one with a mind sharp enough to cut through the modern legalese and see the forgotten truth hidden in his dusty documents. He chose a small practice in the nearby town of Red Creek, a place that still smelled of old paper and wood polish, not the sterile, chrome and glass offices of the city. He walked into the firm of Amelia Vance, Esq., and was met by a woman no older than 30, her hair in a tight bun, her desk covered in stacks of litigation files. She eyed him with a mixture of polite interest and practiced weariness. He looked, she knew, like another pro bono case. "Mr. Thorne, what can I do for you?" she asked, her voice professional and crisp. Elias placed the lacquered box on her desk. "They're trying to evict me," he said simply, the box acting as his proof. Amelia's eyes flickered to the name on the eviction notice. "Oakhaven Estates HOA? Oh, I know their counsel. They're aggressive. Is this about property violations? The unapproved fence, the height of your grass, I'm guessing?" "It's about what my land is," Elias corrected, his gaze holding hers. "Not what they think it should be." He opened the box and carefully, reverently, laid out the 1923 deed and the 1888 survey map on her pristine desk. Amelia's professional smile faltered slightly. "Mr. Thorne, these are interesting, but I'm afraid unless they prove a direct breach of the title transfer." She trailed off, her eyes scanning the elaborate, flowing script of the documents. Her brow furrowed as she read. Her hand reached for a magnifying glass. Her initial polite disinterest melted away, replaced by a quiet, building fascination. She was a woman of the law, a creature of logic and detail, and the documents laid out before her were a puzzle of a magnitude she hadn't seen since law school. She spent a full hour reading, cross-referencing, her questions sharp and rapid-fire. Riparian rights. Charter 44 of the Municipal Act of 1898. Preservation of the natural hydrological state of the Thorne parcel and all contiguous tracts. "My God," she whispered, not to him, but to the legal ghost she was uncovering. She looked up, her face a mask of stunned disbelief. "Mr. Thorne, this is a legal masterpiece." It's a living document. The way this charter is written, it binds this land to its original state in perpetuity. The developers, they must have seen the modern, clean deed and dismissed these attachments as historical artifacts. They were idiots. Elias simply nodded. They thought it was an old story. Now, it's a legal weapon. Amelia's eyes gleamed with a mix of academic excitement and a lawyer's predatory instinct. Mr. Thorne, if what this deed says is true, you don't just have a defense. You have a nuclear option. You can file an injunction. You can force them to restore the natural water flow. You can legally, rightfully, flood them out. A ghost of a smile touched Elias's lip. I want to do more than just file an injunction. I want to tell them, all of them, at their meeting. Blackwood promised it would be memorable. Amelia's gaze sharpened. She saw the simmering fire beneath the quiet exterior of this old man. Then let's give them a memory they'll never forget. That evening, Elias Thorne walked into the Oakhaven Estates Community Hall. The room, decorated in bland pastels and lit by harsh fluorescent lights, was filled with the self-satisfied residents of the McMansions. They sipped sparkling W. The stunned silence that fell over the Oakhaven Estates Community Hall was a tangible thing, a vacuum of air and sound that held 100 people in its grip. It was a silence filled with the phantom scent of ancient mud and the low, insistent rumble of a river long forgotten. On the stage, Sterling Blackwood's face, which a moment before had been a masterpiece of smug authority, had gone utterly blank. He stared at the legal notice Elias had placed on the podium, his mind struggling to process the implications of the word. It was an elaborate joke, a pathetic bluff. That's what it had to be. Then a single voice, thin with fear, cut through the hush. What did he say? Flood plain. The spell was broken. 100 conversations erupted at once, a cacophony of panicked whispers that rapidly escalated into frantic questions and angry accusations. What's he talking about, Sterling? A woman in the third row shouted, her perfectly manicured hand gesturing frantically. Our homes are on solid ground. You told us. Blackwood's veneer of control shattered. He slammed his fist on the podium, a sound that barely registered above the din. This is nonsense. A pathetic stunt by an old man trying to save his dump of a house. This is not a recognized legal document. We have modern zoning laws, modern permits. He turned his furious gaze on Elias, who stood there quietly, observing the chaos with the calm detachment of a scientist watching a chemical reaction unfold. You're a liar, Thorne! Blackwood roared. He stepped away from the podium, his jaw tight, his expensive suit rumpled by his own agitation. You're trying to scare people. The development was approved by county engineers. There's no flood plain. Elias met his rage with a quiet shrug. The county engineers were working off the developer's surveys, not the original land charters. They filled the wetlands and diverted the creek to build your little kingdom, Sterling. My deed, and the laws it's tied to, predate all of it. They give me the right to restore the natural flow. He pointed a gnarled finger at Blackwood's house, a glass and stone edifice visible through the community hall's panoramic window. Your front yard, Sterling, sits precisely on what was once the deepest part of the marsh. A marsh, incidentally, that was necessary for natural water overflow. Blackwood's face flushed a deep, unhealthy red. He lunged forward, grabbing Elias by the lapel of his worn tweed jacket. You listen to me, you old fool. You come in here and threaten my neighbors, my property, my entire life, and you expect to walk away? I'll have you in court. I'll bury you under so much litigation you won't be able to breathe. Elias didn't flinch. He looked at Blackwood's trembling hands, at the fear and pure, unadulterated hatred in his eyes. You already did, Sterling. You gave me a 30-day notice. You just don't understand what you've awakened. He carefully, almost gently, removed Blackwood's hand from his jacket. And as for litigation, my lawyer will be in touch. Her name is Amelia Vance. Her number is on that notice. Give her a call. He turned and walked away from the podium, leaving Blackwood sputtering in a furious, impotent rage. The community hall, however, was no longer his. The residents, once a docile flock, were now a terrified and enraged mob. They weren't looking at Elias, they were looking at Blackwood. "Sterling, what is he talking about?" a man named Ron shouted from the second row, his face ashen. Ron had just closed on a mortgage for his new McMansion 2 months ago. "Is this real? Did we buy houses that could be flooded?" "Don't be ridiculous, Ron," Blackwood snarled, turning on his neighbor. "He's a senile old man with some fraudulent papers. You trust him over me, over the entire HOA board. We trusted you to do your due diligence," a woman screamed, pushing her way through the crowd. "I sold my family home in the city for this. We invested our entire life savings." The questions came from all sides, a storm of fear and anger. Why wasn't this in the title insurance report? Did you, as the board, know about this? Did the developers know and hide it? Blackwood was suddenly on the defensive, his back against the wall. The very people who had looked to him for leadership, who had admired his ruthless efficiency, were now turning on him. His authority, once absolute, was crumbling in real time. He tried to explain, to rationalize, to dismiss the documents as forgeries, but his voice was drowned out by the rising tide of fear and betrayal. He was no longer the leader. He was a scapegoat. A man who had built an empire on a faulty foundation and was now facing the consequences. One of the other board members, a nervous man named Frank, approached him, his face pale with shock. "Sterling, the developers, they used your firm, didn't they? You signed off on the title. You said it was clean. This affects everything." Black. The chaos of the community hall meeting had been a firestorm, but the morning after, the battle settled into a cold, strategic war. The legal notice, now a piece of paper copied and shared 100 times over, had become the most expensive domino ever pushed. On one side of the board sat Elias Thorne, a quiet, resolute man, and on the other, Sterling Blackwood, a man watching his world crumble brick by brick. Elias met with Amelia Vance in her office, the air thick with the scent of coffee and old book. She had been up all night, and the adrenaline was still humming beneath her professional calm. She had already filed the initial paperwork, a declaration of ancient riparian and hydrological rights, a phrase that sounded as powerful as a hammer blow. It was a formal, legally binding notification of Elias's intent. "They've already retained counsel," Amelia said, placing a thick file on her desk. "Oakhaven Estates and the original developers. They've brought in a team from the city, the kind that charges by the minute and bills in 6-figure installments. They're furious." She leaned forward, her eyes bright with a mix of anticipation and warning. "This is going to get nasty, Mr. Thorne. They will try to bury us in motions. They will question the authenticity of your deed. They will call you a fraud, a fantasist. They will drag your name through the mud." Elias simply took a sip of his coffee. "They've been doing that for 2 years, Ms. Vance. I'm quite used to it. The deed is real. My story is real. What they've built is on a foundation of lies. They can't win a battle with the truth." Amelia smiled, a genuine, appreciative glint in her eyes. "The truth, Mr. Thorne, is expensive. We have to be prepared for every attack. They will try to invalidate the deed. We need to secure the original in a bank vault, immediately." She had already arranged for a legal courier. "And we need to find the old county clerk records that verify the 1888 charter was never officially rescinded. This is a game of history, and they have no idea what they're up against." Across town, in his opulent, glass-walled office that looked out over his sprawling, pristine lawn, Sterling Blackwood was a man on the edge of a precipice. His phone was a constant, frantic chime of incoming calls. Neighbors he'd golfed with, board members he'd commanded, developers he'd done business with, all of them were now calling with the same panicked message. "What have you done?" He paced back and forth, the plush carpet doing little to absorb his rage. He had dismissed the threat as a joke, a pathetic theatrical display. But his lawyers, a team he'd paid millions to keep on retainer, were telling him a different story. "The legal notice is authentic, Mr. Blackwood," his senior counsel, a man named Henderson, said over the phone, his voice strained. "We've confirmed the county records from that period. The charter exists. The deed is a nightmare. It's a legal gray area that's almost 150 years old, and it could wipe out every single one of your properties. Find a way out, Henderson," Blackwood bellowed into the phone. "Invalidate the deed. Threaten the old man. Whatever it takes. This Thorne, he's going to ruin me. We're exploring all options, but our hands are tied in a direct legal capacity for now," Henderson replied. "A declaration like this will take months, maybe years to litigate. The old man is not in a hurry, and he's found a good lawyer. My advice is to try and negotiate a settlement. Buy him out. The cost of a few million is nothing compared to a billion-dollar lawsuit." Blackwood's face twisted in disgust. "Settle? With that parasite? I'd rather burn every penny I have than give him a dime. Find another way." He hung up the phone with a violent slam, the sound echoing in the cavernous room. He stood before his panoramic window, staring out at the kingdom he had helped build. He saw his neighbor, Ron, yelling at his wife as he pointed to a spot on his lawn, a frantic, paranoid fear gripping him. He saw the Oak Haven Estates sign, polished and gleaming, a monument to a perfect lie. And he saw Elias's ramshackle farmhouse, a defiant, ugly blemish in the middle of his perfect world. A cold, dangerous calm settled over Blackwood. The legal route was a slow, expensive knife fight. But there were other ways, other avenues to solve a problem like Elias Thorne. A problem that couldn't be bought or bullied. A problem that had to be erased. He picked up his phone and made a call, not to his lawyer this time, but to a different kind of professional. His voice was low, devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to his earlier fury. "I need a job done," he said. "A quiet one. Something to make a problem disappear. The target is an old man in Oak Haven Estates, and the problem is a box of old papers." That evening, as dusk settled over the old farmhouse, a black sedan, sleek and anonymous, drove slowly down Elias's street, its tint. The sun had been gone for 2 hours, leaving the Oak Haven Estates community cloaked in a velvet blackness that swallowed the pristine lawns and uniform houses whole. Only the dim glow of automated porch lights cut through the night, a silent, sterile vigilance. But at the edge of the manicured world, at Elias Thorne's farm, the darkness was different. It was deep and ancient, filled with the rustle of leaves and the distant, familiar murmur of the creek. A sleek black sedan, its engine as silent as a whisper, coasted to a stop 100 yards from the farmhouse. A man emerged from the passenger side, a figure sculpted from shadow. He was not a thug. He moved with the quiet, efficient purpose of a predator. He wore black from head to toe, and in his hand was a small, high-tech kit. He had done his research. The old man was alone, the house was old, and the deed was somewhere inside. A simple snatch and grab. In and out. No noise. No fuss. He was inside within a minute, a whisper of a tool slipping the ancient lock. The house breathed around him, a ghost of old wood and musty paper. He moved through the living room, his movements precise, his flashlight a thin beam cutting through the darkness. He knew the target, a lacquered box. He'd seen the pictures. He found it on the study desk, a small, dark shape. He slipped on a pair of gloves, his movements clinical. He lifted the box. It was empty. A wave of cold, professional frustration washed over him. Blackwood had been explicit. Get the deed. He was a man who did his job, and now he had to improvise. He had to find the old man. The house was a labyrinth of half-lit rooms and creaking floorboards. He moved with more urgency now, his eyes scanning for any sign of life. Elias, however, was already awake. He'd been awakened by the almost imperceptible click of the front door lock, a sound he had heard 1,000 times over 100 years. He didn't panic. Panic was a waste of breath. He simply lay in the darkness of his bedroom, his senses honed by a lifetime of quiet living. He heard the footstep, not the shuffling of a neighbor or the hurried pace of a solicitor, but the careful, measured tread of a man who didn't want to be heard. He slipped out of bed, his bare feet silent on the cold wood floor. He moved not to the front door, but to the back, towards the kitchen and the old pantry. The house had secrets. His great-grandfather had built it to last, to withstand not just the seasons, but the occasional unwanted guest. There was a crawl space beneath the kitchen, a forgotten tunnel that led to the stone foundation, a hiding place for his family during the old, rough days. He had used it as a child, a fortress against imaginary monsters. Now, it was a very real one. The intruder moved into the kitchen, his flashlight beam sweeping over the polished wood floor. He saw the plate on the counter, the half-full glass of water. The old man was here, somewhere. A new plan formed. He would wait. He would force the old man out. He turned off his flashlight and settled into the darkness, his breathing shallow. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Elias, a man of 80 years, moved with the grace of a shadow, slipping into the crawl space, the cool, damp earth a familiar embrace. He didn't move towards the front of the house. He moved towards the back, towards the faint gurgle of the creek. The intruder had forgotten that while he knew the layout of the house, Elias knew the land. He waited, listening. He heard the intruder's impatience, a low sigh of frustration, a faint electronic chime from the back porch. The intruder had been smart, planting a small, almost invisible tracking device on the underside of Elias's porch rail, just in case. But Elias had just taken it with him, and was now moving further and further from his house, leaving a false trail. The intruder, tracking the signal, moved out of the house and followed it towards the creek, his certainty returning. He was out of his element now, in the wild, tangled undergrowth that Elias had refused to pave over, but he was getting closer. The tracker was leading him straight to the old man. Elias waited in the thick brush by the creek, the sound of the water a soothing rhythm. He held a small, flat rock in his hand. He heard the footsteps now, close. The intruder was moving fast, a hunter closing in on his prey. The flashlight beam cut through the air, and for a brief, terrifying moment, it landed on Elias's face, his eyes glinting in the light. The intruder grinned, a flash of white in the darkness. He raised a hand, a silent command to stop, to surrender. But Elias had not moved. He had simply waited, a statue. The ground beneath the intruder's feet, however, had moved. The intruder took one final, confident step, and the ground gave way with a wet, sucking sound. The creek bed, a place the Oakhaven Estates developers had tried to pave over but had ultimately given up on, was a hidden, boggy nightmare.